Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. It's Survey Program. It's the 25th episode. Can you believe we're already at 25 of these bad boys? That's a lot of podcasts. While we wait for Chapter 5, a little bit of news. We had the trailer for the Tina figurine is out. It's got new voiceover by Toby. It's a funny little video. No other major updates. Presumably it's still in console certification and localization. Just notes on this episode, don't think there's any major content warnings, and also, big thing, we don't really discuss any major spoilers for any of the other works we talk about and bring in to analyze Deltarune here, so if you're trying to avoid spoilers, I think you're A-okay to listen to this one. Music's by Highwell. Oh shit, right, I forgot. If you're a $5 a month supporter on groupofshrike.net, you can get access to bonus episodes. I just recorded a fun new bonus episode about questionable content, the webcomic, and 2000s webcomics in general with Sophia, frequent Survey Program guest and host of Swords Against Cerebus, right here on Group of Shrike. Great episode, you can go listen right on the website at the link in the description. Oh, and join the Discord. It's Survey Program. We got Valerie in. Valerie, this is your 5th appearance, I think. You're going to get a challenge coin.
My challenge coin.
Yeah, you're getting your 5 appearance challenge coin,
Yep.
Which is a real thing that I actually thought about doing challenge coins for guests, and it turns out they're like $100 or something, like per piece. So
Am I not worth that?
I mean,
Am I not worth a challenge coin?
There's I could think of a lot better ways to spend $100 on you.
Like what?
Than a challenge coin.
Like what?
Like a soccer jersey that you want or something.
Sure, I do want a few of those.
Couple dinners. We are just very slightly sauced because
we got dinner.
We had a couple beers at a sushi place. We had a couple of cold Sapporos and a frosty glass
At our neighborhood.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with a couple cold Sapporos and a frosty glass.
The Trump voice is not a winner.
That's true. He doesn't drink. It actually doesn't work at all.
It's not rating well at all. It's not.
It's
the
true.
impressions. It's just not. It's meteoric. It's cratering. You got to stop that.
Okay, Toby Fox is a millennial.
And so are you.
And so am I.
And so am I, kinda.
And so Valerie's sort of on the fence with Zoomers, but
I'm a Zillennial.
You're a Zillennial. You're a Zelensky.
Yep.
Okay, but really, that's the important point of this episode is that Toby Fox is a millennial. Toby Fox understands the world like a millennial does. His work is through a millennial cultural lens.
Yeah.
And so to understand that, we have to zoom out. And we first have to ask, what is a generation? A generation is a socially arbitrated way of dividing up people by age, right? It's a way of loosely organizing people by their shared cultural and historical experiences into some sort of coherent identity. And necessarily, a definition of a generation is always going to be a little bit bullshit because of that, right? But It's a useful lens, as we often use different lenses, it's a useful lens for understanding art.
Sure. History advances, it develops, it progresses, it moves, and people that are born into the conditions that they're born into, which is to say that we are all inextricably defined by the generation that we exist in, right? We're defined by the conditions that we emerge from, that we grow in, that we get our first jobs in, that we die in, and so on and so forth. So even if the idea of a generation is arbitrary blocks with arbitrary cutoffs, right? Or coincidentally, a lot of people say the cutoff for millennial is a year before I was born. But I remember 9/11, which is the real.
I think that's the real.
I was a toddler, but I remember 9/11. So my point is that even if generations, millennial, Zoomer, Gen Alpha, are these arbitrary blocks, that they're still related to a development, right? They're related to a progress of history or a movement in history, right? So they still exist in some sense, even if it's a little fuzzier,
Yeah. And so...
And the art that they produce, more importantly, the art that they produce is just as much, if not even more, defined by those conditions. Nobody's free from their conditions. Nobody produces art in a void. Nobody produces art in a vacuum, right? When they produce art necessarily coming from a place of personal experience, whether or not it's about yourself and your life.
Yeah. And I would say, in fact, that art and culture are how we arbitrate and understand generations. When you think about baby boomers, you think about Woodstock. You think about classic rock. You think about you think about psychedelica. You think about that cultural expression, right? When you think about Gen X, you think about Friends.
Yeah.
And REM. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah.
And so, and when you think about Gen Alpha, you think about Skibbity Toilet and Italian brain rot.
6-7.
6-7.
Yeah.
Tung 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 Sahur.
That's Italian brain rot.
That's Italian brain rot. That's also Italian. I don't know, dude. I'm so old.
So Tung 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 Sahur.
Okay, tell me about this.
As a stick guy.
Yeah.
That's like an Indonesian like morning prayer, like from what I understand.
Yeah.
Like you bang, you like bang something to be like, I think it's like tongue to tongue,
Yeah,
the noise
it's onomatopoeia.
Sahur,
Yeah.
So that's so honestly the thing about Tung 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 Sahur is that he's not just a representative of Gen Alpha, but a representative of Indonesian culture on the world stage. One of the only main subliminated products of Indonesia as a nation.
And see, when you're talking about Gen Alpha, now you can say stuff like, and that represents the fact that Gen Alpha is more internationally connected by barrier-breaking
Sure.
internet culture than ever before.
By AI, yeah.
By AI, right? And of course, right, and of course, their experience of culture is arbitrated through the computer in a way that nobody ever has been before.
Yeah.
By virtue of, rather than just connecting with other people to share human-made works, they're connecting with other computers to share computer-made works.
Sure, yeah.
And we've completely disappeared up the asshole of the internet. See, that's the kind of bullshit that you can say when you talk about generations, and that's what makes them so useful. And so I was thinking about this topic because you just read a novel that's about generational change, and it's Buddenbrooks.
Yes, Buddenbrooks by Thomas Mann is a early 20th century German novelist who wrote, thank you, Palm, that's right, who wrote social realist novels, one of which was Buddenbrooks, which demonstrates and describes the evolution of a family across 3 generations or 4 generations, and the differences between them, the conflicts between them that arose from the varying material conditions of Germany in the 20th century, which is a lot more entertaining than it sounds, and I don't think very entertaining to describe any further.
Yeah, that's fair.
For this podcast.
Fair enough.
You should read it, it's really good, but, yeah.
But and so I'm also thinking, in terms of what art defines a generation, it's often like, what is the new thing that there's a lesser barrier of entry to get into, right? And so for older generations, it was the novel, right? And for younger boomers and for Gen Xers, like the small film, right? Just picking up a camcorder, that became broadly accessible to young people for the first time. And so you get stuff like Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape, like winning, Palme d'Or at Cannes, because it's the first time that smaller film productions can get off the ground in that same way, right?
Kate and I will have this conversation pretty frequently when we're like, are there any millennial, like, who are the millennial directors? And there's a few, but like, who are the millennial directors? Who are the millennial novelists? And there's none, because millennials suck at writing novels, and all modern novels are bad. So we'll say that. We'll go back and forth, right? But like, which belies the question that what is the millennial art form then, right?
Yeah.
So like, that would be.
And I would say that the millennial art object, right? When you're a millennial and you have a story that you want to tell, the default way that your mind jumps to doing that is with a video game. It's with an indie game. It's with an indie game. It's with an indie game. That's how we express ourselves. And so, when you have a story that's eating a hole in your heart, you get it out with an indie game. That's like the default way that and I'm not saying that nobody ever makes any other kind of art, right, as a millennial. But I'm saying
animation would be like,
and I want to touch that. I want to touch on that because if the small scale film was a defining art object of earlier generations, and the novel or the short story was before that, and poetry, like, it's animation and art, and animation as an art, and indie games as an art that are like the defining ways of millennial expression. And also, they're the first places that millennials really started to break through into the mainstream popular consciousness, right? And so we were on a bit of an animation kick recently. And so I wanted to talk about some millennial-led creative projects and animate and projects across the various medium, and how they can help us understand and situate Toby Fox, Undertale and Deltarune in a context.
Yeah.
And so first off, before I dive into that, I want to ask, what is the millennial experience? And so you already brought up 9/11, right? And I think 9/11 happening in our childhood, right?
Yeah.
Whether that, in various stages of our childhood or adolescence, I think that's a shared experience for millennials, right? That's something that brings us together and sets us apart from other generations, right? And I would say even bigger than that, the even bigger thing is the Great Financial Crisis, the Great Recession.
Absolutely.
Right? The 2008 and the recession coming at just either at the cusp of our adulthood or prior to our adulthood, and informing and closing off the possibilities of economic advancement for our generation is a fundamental experience for us.
I would also say, paired with that, the general cruelty and despair, at least for American artists, of the war on terror, of participating in that or being a sort of ambient element of that. Right?
Yeah.
I think that a lot of millennial art, including Undertale and Deltarune, I would say, responds to that cruelty, and the cruelty of like a realpolitik, like need for violence.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of millennial art interacts with that.
And that brings me to Rebecca Sugar.
Yes.
And that brings me to Rebecca Sugar.
One of the goats.
Yes, absolutely one of the goats. That brings me to Rebecca Sugar and Steven Universe, because it's at its heart, it's a rumination on violence and war that happened while we're children, right? And, and how do we respond to that? And how do we understand that, and how do we come of age in the shadow of that and try to be better people than those that came before? And I think really in the end, if you had to pick one other work by a millennial that's most similar to Undertale, it would be Steven Universe. It would be Steven's own universe.
Yeah, for sure. Like they're often either lampooned or grouped together in the same, like, loving the boss beats the game, or like loving the evil gym dictators wins the the series. That the power of love and forgiveness can overcome any challenge, which is I think more facile than either game or show presents. But I think that's what it's understood as popularly.
Absolutely.
Is that their products, their art about like love overcoming difficulty, or love overcoming fascism or evil, or an attempt at evil, like Asgore presents in Undertale,
Yeah, exactly. And obviously that as has been criticized and discussed ad nauseum, that approach does have its limits, right? Because it does rely on the opposition that you're dealing with being fundamentally humanist at heart, right? Having some redeemable quality. The famous House of Decline. I think we're going to have to kill this guy, Steven. Panel.
Exactly.
But if you choose to approach the game world of Undertale with violence, then it responds with Sans kicking your ass, and everybody thinks that's badass, right? Like nobody thinks that Sans is unjustified in doing that. And similarly, and I will say I'm not like a Steven Universologist. I haven't been super. I never watched Future, which I know is much more of a ruminant. It's kind of deconstruct some of this stuff.
Also, haven't watched Future. But I did watch all of Steven Universe within the past 2 years. Again, for the second time. I watched it when it came out, of course.
I should check out Future. All I know is I love Pearl. Shoutouts to Pearl.
I love Lapis.
And and Peridot.
Love Lapis. I love Lapis Lazuli. I love Lapis.
And
I love Lapis. At all of the mods on the server, if you also love Lapis Lazuli, at all of us at the mod tag, if you also love Lapis Lazuli.
I will say also that Lapis and Peridot is a great our relationship mirror. It's very, one of those. It's great to see us represented on screen.
Yeah, and that'll come back again later.
Yeah, it's true. And then recently I got back into I briefly subscribed to HBO Max to watch Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is not millennial art but is great.
Is Ira Parker a millennial?
Actually, Ira
Parker is low-key a millennial. So that might be. It's not in the scope of the.
No, he's 41.
It's
He's
not in the
like
scope of this paper, but Ira Parker is actually a millennial.
Okay, so maybe it actually kind of does line up with that like hope core, you know. So okay, a little bit. Anyway, it's great, by the way. If you have ever had any interest in A Song of Ice and Fire, I honestly think A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is the best it's ever been on screen.
It's awesome.
It's so good. But anyway, I subscribed to HBO and I was like, oh shit, Adventure Time's on here, and I was I loved Adventure Time, you know, when it was coming out, and I went back and started watching again, and I finally finished it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, fuck, this is incredible. Yeah. And then watched with Valerie the series Fionna and Cake, which is, first off, intensely millennial. Intensely, deeply millennial.
Yes. It is very much about the tried and true millennial trope of adulting. About, you know, hashtag adulting, about how do you even live in this world? Like, who prepared us for this? I'm not prepared to be an adult. I'm not prepared to, you know, like, face all these challenges in my life, which I think is the quintessential, sometimes to the point of parody, but the quintessential millennial experience in art.
Yeah, one also like girls.
Absolutely. Is like hashtag adulting.
Yeah, but you know, that also represents that like hard economic ceiling that we faced. And also in that sense of like, you know, sort of that stuckness, and also critically in remixing beloved characters, throwing them into a new context and using it to tell a new story. Yeah. It's a parallel for Deltarune. Right?
Yeah,
Deltarune is exactly the same thing, where it takes characters, it switches their context up, and it uses them to tell this story about a place that's kind of stagnant and stuck, and you know needs some extraordinary infusion of magic to change it. And so I think Fionna and Cake is a big parallel there as well to Deltarune.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I grew up on Adventure Time, like, absolutely. I think, like, the first ship I really cared about as a kid, as a teen, was Bubbly.
Yeah.
Like, I had until I lost it a few years ago, for, like, 10 straight years, I had the punk shirt that Marceline gives to Bubblegum.
Yeah.
But, like, I loved it. I love Adventure Time. I think it was
That's way better than my first ship.
Also, I don't want to know about your first ship, but also Fionna and Cake. Flapjack.
Oh, Flapjack. Yes, so good.
Yes, but I haven't watched Flapjack in a long time, so I can't really speak to the degree of hopefulness it has. But I thought it's worth mentioning.
It certainly, alongside the Decemberists, represented a peak in like whaling culture in American culture. That was very strange.
Sorry, what was your favorite?
I was like, the listeners want to know about my cringe first ship. And so the first ship that I was invested in, I'm going to age myself as being a bit on the older side of the spectrum than Valerie. The first ship that I was deeply invested in was... Okay, so it was a Harry Potter ship.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, well, yes, it was.
I had no idea. You never told me.
Yes, I know. I've never told this to Valerie before.
Holy fuck.
It was a Harry Potter... You want to guess what it was? It was straight.
Harry and Hermione?
No. It was Harry Luna. Because I was reading as the books were coming out, and I really thought that Harry should have got with Luna Lovegood.
I didn't even read the Harry. This is why I'm a bad millennial. This is why I have to be shunted to Z-lennial. I never read Harry Potter.
That's probably good.
I hated it as a kid.
That's probably
I read
the best.
Percy Jackson. Shout out Percy Jackson. Also not great, but I read it. I love that shit.
That's for the best. Now, here's what I will say about obviously Rowling, a heinous person who has used all of her who has put all of her success into hatefulness in a way that almost no one ever has. Like, really, truly, it's incredible. It's like if we haven't seen anything like this since like D.W. Griffiths or something. But like, as I did find the part where it briefly turned, where it just like decided to ditch all the normal fantasy tropes and turn into like a bleak British political drama in the middle of it was like insane. And so Order of the Phoenix was always my favorite.
Yeah. So Vikings grouped together in a big pile. Like all of the animation in general that I think, like the kids' cartoons, the cartoons in general that came out around. Oh my God, Paul. So my bird is just absolutely, he just flew around the entire room. It was very brave.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just gonna name a few. So Adventure Time, Misadventures of Flapjack. Fuck, what's the one with the little fat kid who eats a lot?
What the fuck are you talking about?
Little purple fat kid that eats lava.
What the hell are you talking about?
Chowder.
I like Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends.
Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends.
That was great.
Yeah. Swear to God, this isn't just remember.
Let's remember some guys.
The point of all this, I think that broadly a lot of them are defined by a sense of stagnation.
Yeah.
And a sense of limitation that I think Fionna and Cake especially emphasizes, of like a very clear ceiling of aspiration, right? Like, Adventure Time is very grand and hopeful and magical, right?
Yeah.
But like, also, it's just about two guys living in a house.
Yeah.
Like, no one really, like, I mean, there's some ascension and everything, but like, Fionna and Cake especially, like, it's like an apotheosis of that by realizing it, by making it realistic and making the hard cap just like just keeping a job.
Yeah, keeping your shitty apartment.
Keeping your shitty apartment with your cat. Getting a job, keeping a job, knowing how to function as an adult. And I think a lot of these shows like kind of have that sense of stagnation in general. And to do a little bit of Zoomer flexing here, to flex my like the Z side of my Zillennial.
Yeah.
Though I do broadly self-identify as a millennial. Because everyone said I was a millennial when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And they were like, you're a Zoomer, chud. You're a Zoomer. Anyways, to flex that muscle a little bit, I thought that there was a quote recently. Because I actually don't even know if it was recent or not, but I watched all of the Amazing Digital Circus recently, which Kate has not watched.
Yeah.
You might get her to watch it. We're gonna figure out a plan. I'm gonna see it in theaters July 5th, the second day of it being out. On that shit. Love Jax. Anyways, so I watched all of that recently, and there was a quote by Gooseworks that was like, someone asked, I think in her Tumblr, that was like, if you could summarize your show to one theme, what would it be? And I'm paraphrasing here. She said it's that there is value, that you can find value in a stagnant life. It's always possible to find value in a stagnant life. And I think that is a really useful, like, description or lens which you can view a lot of millennial art, including...
And you can bring that right into Undertale.
Deltarune and Undertale.
Yeah, you can bring that right into Undertale with the way that they've built their own society underground, even though it's unchanging. You know, they've found this, you know, they've created something out of nothing there.
Yeah.
And obviously it needs a kick into action, right? And that's what a lot of these storylines are about, like a kick into action of that stagnant life to like find the next step in it, right? Sure. And then Deltarune, you know, you got Hometown, and Hometown's a bit of a darker take.
Nobody leaves it.
Yeah.
Nobody leaves it. Only one person who's left it.
Well,
two people. There's two people that's left it. One through a supposedly bright and noble and like aspirational path.
Yeah.
The rare one guy who escapes the one planetary body that escapes the orbit, Asriel, and then of course, you know, my Maoist gorilla, you know, who escapes a whole other way.
Yeah, Des, obviously.
Yes.
You know, again, with the assumption that Des is the knight.
Des is the knight.
Yeah,
let's not be ridiculous.
And I have to say that, otherwise people will be like, what do you mean?
How do you know?
How do you know? It's actually fucking...
It's Gerson.
It's Gerson Knight. But, you know, and that's interesting because it's like there's sort of a dualist thing where it's like the recent graduates, you know, the Catty and Bratty and Burger Pants, Pizza Pants and Deltarune, you know, they represent that sort of stuckness, that millennial adulthood.
Shit jobs.
They have shit jobs, they have shit lives, they're stuck in a shit town.
And Metaton, which I have recently postulated as part of that same group,
I like that idea too.
He's stuck in he's you know, a shitty repper.
Yeah.
He's stuck in a house. He's stuck like probably a repper, but he's like stuck in an apartment with his cousin who's a cop.
Yeah.
Which is like the most small town shit ever.
That's true. That's very true.
So real small town bullshit. Is the transgender rapper stuck in an apartment with his cop cousin, like doing nothing, and also the mad dummy probably also.
Yeah, it's true.
Also a shitty rapper.
Yeah, posting on /TTT.
Yeah,
it's just horrible. It's just horrible.
The Metoids when they use all the milk before me.
And it's you know, there's that dichotomy there where you're simultaneously representing millennial adulthood and millennial childhood with the main cast, right? You know, and I, that's really interesting, right? Because again, I wanted to do this episode because because Undertale and Deltarune are primarily played by a younger audience, which is fine. They're great games for that, right? But I did want to recenter it and understand it as a game made by a 33-year-old, right? And, you know, I'm saying that maybe slightly selfishly as someone who's 33 and likes this and occasionally, you know, feels like, oh, am I too old to like this? No, the person making it is this age. Of course I'm allowed to like this shit because it's by my generation. It's by, you know, someone speaking from my experience.
Same for Amazing Digital Circus, by the way. It's my age cohort. It's fine. It's okay to have a Mage Jax plush on your shelf. It's fine. It's normal.
And you know, speaking to that too, you know, thinking about what's the media diet of millennials, right? And so, you know, obviously most generations grow up watching art made by the generations before, right? You know, actually, I think it's actually quite admirable how many things millennials have been making while we're still young, right? Sure. And you know, we're still early on in the story of our generation. But, you know, most of our cultural touchstones are made by people older than us. They existed before, and that's true of Toby as well, right? And really, Toby, I was thinking about this because Toby represents one of the first waves of narrative RPG developers who grew up from being, you know, from birth, having narrative RPGs existing as a thing, right?
Yeah.
And so you had to have been born in like the mid-'80s or later to really have your whole life be a thing where RPGs existed, right? And obviously them getting more complex was you know, a late 80s, 90s phenomenon. And so, you know, Undertale and Deltarune really represent that like next generation of RPG that's based on what came before.
And I think the beauty of that, I think what's really interesting about that is that there's a degree of like the transmission of lessons learned based on your experiences, right? So, like, we grew up with a diet of Gen X art, basically, and you know, like boomer art, right?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, people within generations learn lessons about life as they age, of course, and then they transmit that through their art.
Yeah.
Right, and it's not to say that art is necessarily didactic. I'm extremely opposed to that, but necessarily, art does you metastasize the lessons you learn in life, the things you learn in life through your art. And I think that if there's anything that like millennial artists are like beaming down, just, you know, like angels descending from heaven, handing mana to like Zoomers and alpha, is that even in a stagnant life, there's value. You can find value in a stagnant life.
Absolutely. And
there's a way out of hometown. You know, there's a way out of hometown. This is, you know, Deltarune is a work of art that is in progress, so it's hard to forecast here. But I find it really hard to believe playing Undertale that it's going to have anything but a very aspirational or liberatory.
Do people really? It seems like a lot of people think that this game's going to be a bummer.
No, I don't.
And I'm like, do you really think that? I don't think that.
I think that the message of, and we don't like to do wish casting or forecasting here, but I think that if there was a message that I could probably predict, it was that it would be that no matter how stagnant and sucks and locked up things feel as a teen, like Chris, there's going to be a way out. And you don't have to swallow the dark shard and do evil shit and, you know, like nightmare, you know, you hate your friends, you want to shoot up the school or whatever, like type shit that Jess is whispering and Chris is here. Like, there's a better way, you know, and like Fionna and Cake was about that. It's about how, you know, that you can find meaning in that. You can hang out with your friends. Good job with your friends. Just find value in living life, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that, again, more wish casting here. I think that the Amazing Digital Circus will have a similar ending.
We'll see. In theaters, June something.
June 5th.
June 5th. In theaters, June 4th.
I'll be watching it June 5th.
Yeah.
It's going to the Federal Way Cinemark. Meet me at the Federal Way Cinemark June 5th, 7 p.m. if you want me to be like really surprised that you heard that and you were there, and I'd be like, oh my god, really? That's crazy.
You heard that. Federal Way, Washington, June 5th, 7 p.m. Cinemark. If you want to.
The Cinemark. I'm going to be there cheering for Jax.
Yep. And you can say hello to Valerie.
Not Kate.
And not me, because I won't be there.
Just me and Beatrix.
Beatrix. listeners will know Beatrix. Yes. Beatrix was on an episode.
Notable and powerful friend Beatrix.
And so, you know, going back to what I was saying about, you know, Toby Fox being raised on media, right? So, you know, French film critics started calling film the seventh art, right? Because it represented partially to like emphasize how young it was, right, compared to the other art forms, right?
Yeah.
That it was it was a new form of art that from what came before, and games are even newer than that, right?
Yeah.
Video games are even younger than the art. They're the eighth art. I really do think that. I really do genuinely think that.
Yeah.
I think that there's worth in I think we're well past the discussion of games as art. And I actually think that we're to the point where that's now been used as a facile way to defend some real garbage. It's like games are art, but Horizon Zero Dawn isn't.
Some awful facile garbage like Disco Elysium, which is not art.
Shut up. What was it?
Is that millennial art too?
Yeah. Is it? Yeah, I think it is.
Kurvitz?
Yeah. I think it's. How old is Robert Kurvitz? Robert Kurvitz is like.
You might be like 55 though.
You never know. How he's 41. All right, yeah. Millennial art. Well, it was what
It is. My God, it's really art. This is really our art form.
It is our art form, right? Because we made the definitive video game. But it's like what was it? Northern Lion. Speaking of voices of the millennial generation, what was it? Northern Lion said where all games are made for 5-year-olds. And Disco Elysium is revolutionary because it's made for 15-year-olds.
It's true.
It's so true.
And Deltarune might be made for 12-year-olds.
Deltarune might be made for, which is itself a revolutionary advancement for the art form.
It's potent.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And I think it is a genuine rumination on teenagehood. But just thinking about that as a new art form, right? Of course we're going to have younger people expressing mastery in it sooner than other art forms, but we are seeing millennials break into film. And so I wanted to think about what do filmmaking millennials have to say about Undertale and Deltarune and the millennial context in general, right? And so obviously there's a lot of millennial filmmakers out there. There's
like three.
There's maybe? Like three. You've got
Jane Schoenbrunn.
Yeah, you've got Jane Schoenbrunn, you got Chloe Zhao. But I wanted to talk about a couple. Well, actually, I want to talk about. So you could talk about. I want to talk about three filmmakers. I want to talk about Jane Schoenbrunn. I wanted to talk about Ryan Coogler, and I wanted to talk about Matt Johnson.
Yep.
And I wanted to talk about them in this context, which was thinking about how Toby digested games that came before. The RPGs made by the previous generation. Your Mother, your Dragon Quest, your Final Fantasies we've talked about on the show. All these other semi-obscure Japanese RPGs that have been referenced, and thinking about how millennial filmmakers have digested the genres that have come before, the genre pictures and even blockbuster films, right? And, more commercial films, and digested them and used their language to tell their own personal stories, divorced from the original corporate context that those blockbusters and those genres were released in.
Absolutely.
And so with Jane Schoenbrunn, you have her appropriating the language of horror, slasher films and horror films.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
And Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and, a bunch of schlock like that. And using it to tell this deeply affecting trans story in I Saw the TV Glow. Yeah. Right?
There's still time.
There's still time. And that's a similar message of stagnation, of economic frustration, of escapism.
A ray of light penetrating the oceanic depths, right? You're 2 layers deep. I don't know the layers of the ocean because I'm a fraud, but it's like you're in the murky depths and there's just a penetrating ray of light. There's still time left. That love can conquer anything. That there's a way out of stagnation if you just love your friends enough.
And isn't the pink opaque the same as the dark world?
Absolutely.
In that way, right? We talked about Chris finding self-expression and gender expression in the dark world on our previous Man Country episode, which you should listen to if you haven't yet.
It's my favorite.
It's a pretty good one. And isn't the TV show that they connected on as youths in I Saw the TV Glow is very similar to that. And I'm also thinking about Ryan Coogler, right? Who worked in the corporate context, right? He did franchise work both in Rocky and Marvel, right? The big, just these like totemic, cultural touchstones
of a prior generation.
Exactly. And then took what he learned from those to make make his own film that used a lot of those like big budget blockbuster touchstones, cinematic language, and Sinners. I'm talking about Sinners here.
Tell a very personal story.
Exactly, to tell a personal story about culture, about appropriation, about
creating art as a black artist.
Exactly, about making art as a black artist, and about like horizontal oppression and the way that the other oppressed people can share, or even if, there's like shared exploitation, right, in the world.
Yeah. And compromising your art or not compromising your art, of forging your own path and finding a way out of it, of finding a way out of the shit-ass South, for example, which all of the 3 remaining characters in the movie find their way out of the shit-ass South.
Yeah, absolutely. And as 2 people who did that, I can relate to that greatly.
Kate and I who did that, we find a lot of personal meaning in that, of being artists in some variety that escaped living in the fucking South.
And in the film, it uses a lot of like corporate filmmaking. It uses a lot of like big franchise film language, and it uses what he learned in blockbuster set piece, and it deploys that genre of like a horror film or an action film, even sort of superhero-y in a lot of ways, right? It's a superhero team up movie, really, in a lot of ways, right? It takes what he learned from the Marvel world to tell his story, and it's interesting because it's like deploying the art forms that were sort of sold to us as children, and using it to tell our own stories.
Absolutely.
And I just find that to be super endearing and interesting, and like really, really fascinating when it comes to determining, like, how do we take what happened? How do we take our childhood and our shared experience, and how do we make our own stories out of it? And in making an indie game, in a lot of ways, a lot of indie games are takeoffs of not the current generation of AAA games, right? They have no relation to the current generation of AAA games.
It's true.
They're often takes on earlier games that were once the cutting edge technologically and staff time and budget wise, and now are more accessible to smaller teams. Not that Deltarune's really a small team game; it's a multi-million-dollar production, but it's that mid-sized game.
Yeah, it's like it's a mid-sized production, but it started as an indie production.
That's true.
And it has indie roots in that way. But I mean, ultimately, like, the label of indie is unnecessary either way. Like, really, when we say that the art form of the millennial is indie games, what we mean is the art form of the millennial is being able... Like, indie games are like an aspirational path out of economic stagnation, right? Like a path that Toby Fox has taken, for example, of making an indie game, living in a basement or whatever. And now... is a really famous individual, like a well-acclaimed individual, who's chilling.
Yeah.
Who's just generally chilling.
Yeah. And even after, and when you've found that success, there's still that element, I think, that's at the core of Deltarune, of like the most valuable thing that you can do is spending time with your friend and forging relationships with your friend. And so I did want to get to that third millennial filmmaker I wanted to talk to, which was Matt Johnson, right? The Canadian Matt Johnson, who I almost got back in a Trump voice there by accident. Matt Johnson, he's very problematic.
It's cratered. It's not a funny voice anymore. It's not funny.
It's not funny. No, I know.
It's not funny. It's very serious.
It's very serious. But Matt Johnson, probably the one that most of my listeners would be least familiar with, would be my guess.
Yeah.
He's a Canadian independent director who probably most famous for Blackberry, I would say. The biopic about the rise and fall of the tech company Blackberry.
It's probably more famous for Nirvana.
Maybe nowadays for maybe nowadays for Nirvana the band, the show, the movie. Which is a band, which is it's a show. It's something that he's been making with his childhood friend Jay McCarroll and a group of other folks that he's known for a long time in the Canadian indie film industry since 2007, where it started as a series of web videos, and it's this ongoing narrative about 2 idiots who are in a band and are trying to play a show at the Rivoli in Toronto, which for those who aren't familiar is a totally middling, absolutely unimportant, random comedy / music venue on Queen Street in Toronto. Their attempt to do this, sort of takes the place of, they're like, sort of, it's like a Calvin and Hobbes style, like they're not really understanding how to be grown-ups, which fits in with our early, discussion about millennialism being about not knowing how to grow up.
How to adult.
How to do adulting.
That stereotype, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, rather than, like, play some other gigs, go to an open mic or whatever, like, they thought is we have to trick them. Like we have to trick them into getting us a show because
Yeah.
because that's what kids have to do, right? You know, if you want to get it, you have to get in a big trench coat to go to the R-rated
So you have to do
movie.
your Ed and Eddie scam to pull off the big jawbreaker heist.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
there's more. Do you remember? Part?
yeah, and it's Ed and Eddie, baby. That was so great. I love
some time.
It's been off the air for some time now. I loved Ed and Eddie so much. I'm very
We're
much
slipping into. Do you remember it?
It's true, we are. Sorry. But, you know, and so, and it's interesting because, you know, in 2007, 2008, when the original web series comes out, you know, it's very much like, you know, it's young people right at the cusp of adulthood, right, who are kind of just living in an apartment, like, doing nothing other than this, right? And that's very recession era, you know, like, very, like, that sort of stagnation core. And then I think it just gets funnier as the years go on, right? Because the next time we check in with these characters is in 2017.
And they're still living
on
together.
A cable series, and they're still living together, and they still have economically advanced in no way at all. Like, I guess they moved into a shitty house instead of a shitty apartment.
Yeah.
But like they don't have jobs, and they haven't played the Rivoli, and they haven't advanced or changed as people in any way. And like that's one of the fundamental gags is they're still doing plans every day to try to achieve the same goal, even though it never works.
Yeah.
And
the movie seizes on that.
Yes.
And is about there's varying arcs of Jay, which I would say is the one with, like, if Matt has 0 degrees of being able to perceive that he is living a shit life and plan on living a better life, Jay has maybe 1 or 2 degrees of being able to perceive this, and occasionally, like, arrives at the conclusion that there's a way out of this, or there should be a way out of this. So there's ongoing crises where he's like, I'm going to break up, get out of the band. You know, break up with friends, but you know. And then get out of the band, I'm going to go play a show, I'm going to go do an open mic. And in the movie, it comes to a head with that, right? And I'm not going to just summarize a movie here, but the resolution of it is that, what's the point? What's the point of getting out of, you know, of breaking out of this? You know, what's the point of you know, abandoning my friend when that's what makes life worth living at all, is my friend.
Yeah.
That's what makes life living at all is just fucking around with my friend and making art. And again, not to wish cast, but going off of the themes that we have now in Deltarune, I think that's a reasonable place to expect the story to go, or that it is going currently, is like, you know, maybe Chris's life kind of sucks. Maybe Chris's life is kind of weird, you know? But Chris has Susie.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe Noelle's life kind of sucks. But Noelle has Susie and Chris, you know, and they have each other. And they have Ralsei, maybe, kind of. You know, they have each other.
And maybe there's a good reason not to engulf the world in darkness after all.
Maybe you shouldn't listen to the whispering dark shard in your ear, you know? Maybe you shouldn't listen to the night, you know, telling you, come on, man, you promised.
Yeah.
You know? Maybe the way out of a stagnant life, maybe a way to find meaning in a life that is economically limited, you know, in the way that Nirvana the band, the show, has this, like, sort of demiurgic ceiling placed on it, where there is no way they're going to go any higher. Fionna and Cake has this demiurgic ceiling placed on it, where there's not even a point where they're like, maybe we'll strike it rich. That kind of planning doesn't even figure into it. It doesn't even figure into Nirvana the band, the show, and of course it doesn't figure into Deltarune because they're kids. But their goal isn't to go to college; it's to survive.
Yeah,
you know,
and it's to have these
meaning.
Adventures that they share with each other as well.
And to find meaning in that, and to find meaning in their weirdo little lives that kind of suck, you know. And I think that's really beautiful, and I think that's really beautiful, especially as we stare down, you know, an oil crisis and a resource crisis, and we stare down a future that's, guys, I'm honest with you, a lot of you are younger than me. I'm honest with you, it's probably not getting any better anytime soon, economically. Like, I don't think opportunities are going to come pouring through the door, and I think it's important to not doom about that. I think it's important to return to the thing that human beings always return to in times of darkness, in times of crushing absolute total darkness, and that is loving your friends. And that sounds so corny, because it is. And if millennial art has taught me anything, and has taught us anything, and could teach you anything, maybe it's okay to be a little bit corny. Maybe it's okay to be a little bit sincere in really dumb and stupid ways, because as long as you love your friends, it's going to be okay.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to end it. I mean, I think we could go on, but I think we're not going to get to a better thesis point on what our generation is about and what Undertale and Deltarune are about than that. So Thanks for listening to the survey program, everybody. See you in the outro.
Bye. Make sure to at me if you like Lapis. Bye.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. You can check us out at groupofshrike.net, where you can support the show to get bonus episodes from Green Room. You can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast with RSS. You can join the Discord to talk Deltarune and more. See you in 2 weeks.
Shrike Amalgamated General Productions GmbH